up if you happen to follow and want a song talking about popping the bottles. Watches and models, I'm not gonna bother. Got us a problem, can't stop it tomorrow. Gotta put your hands up if you happen to follow and want a song talking about popping the bottles. Watches and models, I'm not gonna bother. Got us a problem, can't stop it tomorrow.
Hello, my name is The Truth. Honest solely throwing a grenade in the booth. See me delete these beats out. I'm a white rapper like I TP'd your house. Put your hands up if you happen to follow and want a song talking about popping the bottles. Watches and models, I'm not gonna bother. Got us a problem, can't stop it tomorrow. Change to market Obama. Change you can believe will offer you nada. The same global elite are dropping in dollars. Republic of a puppet, the heart of the monster. Uganda and Gaza are products of anonymous economists and politicians calling the shots. Would you last if it happened tomorrow? Running down your block from an all-black chopper. Zoom like you hopped in a Mazda. Top chopped off, spotlight shined on you. Drive faster, they're starting to catch up. Get a megaphone, start yelling your ass off. This ain't Germany, if you came to murder me, I'm going to the top, so you better aim vertically. Okay, certainly, this ain't brain surgery. Just change the teleprompter like I'm Ron Burgundy.
Put your hands up if you happen to follow and want a song talking about popping the bottles. Watches and models, I'm not gonna bother. Got us a problem, can't stop it tomorrow. Derrick, put your hands up if you happen to follow and want a song talking about popping the bottles. Watches and models, I'm not gonna bother. Got us a problem, can't stop it tomorrow.
That's what I call fear-mongering.
Pessimism, repetition,
Communism, terrorism.
pessimism, repetition,
Communism, terrorism.
pessimism, repetition,
Communism, terrorism.
pessimism, repetition, pessimism, repetition,
Communism, terrorism.
pessimism, repetition,
Communism, terrorism. Historical reminiscence, cause this is repetitious. It's the new world order in the 60th edition. The mission isn't different if it's Hitler to the Clintons or the politicians sitting in trilateral commissions. The president's position has never been our decision. It's been given with permission in a one-party system. You think there's competition in between the opposition, but from Bush to Obama there really isn't a difference. They wish to kill victims of the police state system, so I spit out bars to free us from the prison. I can sound pop to bait you in, then spit real talk like a bait and switch. Take those kids who never gave two shits and make them give one just based on this. Listen, new Rockefeller, old ambitions. They're all terrorists by their own definitions. Give a little kid a missile in the Middle East, tell them it's a competition to see who can live the least. They own television, that's why they don't mention the fact that Tower 7 was controlled demolition. Those in suspicion must be code for magicians, cause those sons of bitches were at home in their kitchens, funding the mission of the opposition, giving them guns and getting shot by our own ammunition. Turn off your television because they won't mention the fact that Tower 7 was controlled demolition.
You can call me crazy, but go look it up. On 9/11, Tower 7 fell without getting touched.
Jay Solo.
9/11 was done by people in our own government, our own banking system, to perpetuate the fear of the American people into subordinating themselves to anything the government wants them to do. That's what it's about, and to create this endless war on terror.
All right. Welcome to Freethinker Radio, 90.1 KPFT Houston and the Conscious Resistance Network. My name is Derrick Bros. I'm here with my buddies Johnny and Micah. What's up, guys?
What's up, Derrick? Good to see you. Good to see you. How's Mexico?
Mexico's good, man. So far, so good. And as you guys who are watching can see, and you guys listening on KPFT tomorrow afternoon, we are in separate locations once again. The time of us hanging out together has come to an end, but we're still going to be here every week bringing you guys uncensored music like you just heard from Jay Soli. That was a song called Tower 7, and I guess our way to mark the 19th anniversary of 9/11 attacks. We got about 20 minutes or so. We're going to do a special episode today. We're going to cover a bunch of headlines, local stuff and national, international related to COVID and beyond that we think is important. And then afterwards, those of you who are listening on KPFT will hear our interview with Richard Gage, the founder of Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth. Those of you who are watching online, the interview is already available. You can go watch it. I just want to add to that before we jump into the local news that starting tomorrow, 9/11, if you're listening on KPFT, it'll be today, 9/11, 9/12, 9/13. There's a 3-day online conference being organized by the Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth. It's called Justice Rising, and you can find out more about that on their website. And if you want to get up to date on some of the truths about 9/11 that aren't being discussed in the mainstream media, But yeah, let's get right into it, guys. I know we have some Houston news. We actually have one bit of good news. Maybe we should start there, huh? We'll go with this one. We'll start with the news about some police officers being fired. I know you guys are watching this. We've been following this. What did you see, Micah?
It's definitely a divisive situation, it seems, within Houston's police and the mayor and such. Art Acevedo is condemning this attack and this shooting. And we spoke about it here on Free Thinker Radio. And basically, 4 Houston police officers have been terminated after an internal investigation determined they did not use reasonable force when they fired their weapons 21 times at a man who had been experiencing a mental health crisis, killing him in April after he was already injured and on the ground. This is that individual had that piece of rebar. This is Nicholas Chavez is his name, 27-year-old. And he'd already been shot and bleeding, was kneeling on the ground and grabbing a stun gun that had already been deployed when 4 officers decided to shoot him. So it turns out that the footage that they showed, Acevedo said he could not defend that, shooting a man 21 times. And the footage also is said to have made Sylvester Turner, I guess, show some facial expressions and such, being visibly upset, they say, by the shooting. And so I guess this is another instance where people are starting to hold officers accountable. Those who were fired were identified as Officer Patrick Rubio, who'd been with the department since 2018, Luis Alvarado, who'd been with the department since 2019, Tapia, who had been with the 2019, and a Sergeant, Benjamin LeBlanc, who had been with the department since October of 2008. So, this is an ongoing story that I'm sure we'll cover more. But yeah, it was a 15-minute confrontation with the police. I also saw that, in the footage, you can the shooting can be heard where callers tell the operators that a man is running around and having a mental breakdown. So apparently to people on the phone calling 911, it was obvious the guy was having mental issues. But in the video footage, officers can be heard telling Chavez, "Hey, buddy, hey, bud, we're here to help you. Relax. No one is shooting, and we're trying to help you." But you know how these sort of situations can be. So I don't know. How do you describe the video?
I'm showing it right now on the screen for everybody who's watching, and you can see, as you mentioned, Micah, he's on his knees when that thing happened. We knew this already because previously this had been kind of talked about. We were one of the probably a few people in Houston in the media talking about the fact that video had already come out showing that he was on his knees. And they show here at the tail end, he starts pulling on the taser. They've shot him with a taser, and he starts pulling on it. And I guess the officer's like, "This guy's pulling me towards him." And that's when the gunshots start going off. And as you said, it was like 21 times. And so at least in this case, the chief of police and the mayor are saying, like, we can't defend those final actions. They specifically say they were fine with how the cops acted throughout the whole incident. It was the final seconds there that they felt, were not in line with HPD policy. And of course, the mother of Nicholas Chavez says that she wants criminal charges, that firing them is not enough. But I guess we'll jump on now to this next one. I know that Johnny's got a Houston-related story about COVID-19. And of course, this is something that we've been talking about here on Free Thinker Radio, since this whole thing began. And last week we were talking about, I showed you guys a clip where I went down to City Hall and I questioned the mayor and I questioned the Houston Health Authority about the case numbers and specifically about the PCR test. And we're going to talk more about that in a second, because now what I was asking them is, how can we trust this PCR test, which seems to be very sensitive and can give false positives? Now that's becoming an international issue, as we're going to see in just a moment. But one thing that I saw before we throw it your way, Johnny, is, I don't know if you guys saw this, but now they're doing random house to house, like, blood checks for antibody tests. This was just announced last week. Houston Health Department leading antibody testing survey to better understand the spread of COVID-19. And the Houston Health Department is collaborating with the CDC, with Rice University, Baylor College of Medicine, to understand how many people in the city were previously affected with the virus that causes COVID-19. So it says teams consisting of Houston Health Department staff and Houston Fire Department paramedics will visit randomly selected homes, asking household members to answer survey questions and provide a blood sample. And phase 1 just started in the last couple of days, and it's going to go through the 24th. And phase 2, they're saying, is 2021. And the mayor said, quote, "If we knock on your door, I strongly encourage you and your loved ones to participate in this important survey. The data you provide will help inform strategies to mitigate COVID-19. And it kind of just goes on there, and it says that you'll be able to identify the people because they're going to be wearing Better Together t-shirts. And it says only homes that are approached by the teams are eligible to participate, and it's apparently voluntary to participate. But it's just, I don't know, maybe it's just because of, maybe for me, it's because we've been talking about these stories in New Zealand and Australia where the cops are going door to door and checking on people, that now that they're going door to door, it's voluntary, it's random, they say. I don't know. Something about this just doesn't feel right to me. What do you guys think about it?
Feels like a slippery slope. It feels like, hey, look, the good people, they'll have news articles about the good people who welcome them and give them cookies and stuff. And then they'll have articles about the people who didn't want to let them in and what horrible miscreants they are. And, one step will go to another, I don't know. Maybe I just have a dire outlook on that, Derrick. I don't know. It just seems a bit creepy. I mean, why can't you just take people who, like, if you're accepting volunteers, just sign up, Yeah.
I mean, it's, Johnny, we're having trouble hearing you. We'll make sure we get Johnny on in just a second, because Johnny's got to tell us about this Houston story. But yeah, I mean, I thought that was one of the latest things I saw in Houston. Now they're doing the antibody test and going door to door, and maybe it is totally voluntary, but how many people know that? We know, in my experience, I've seen when the government shows up at your door, especially, or the authorities tell you about something, it seems like generally people assume they must do it, even if it.
And they want your blood. They're showing up and they want your blood. I mean, goodness, people, what's it take? What's it take? They're not just after your money and your guns, but they want your blood now.
Yeah, exactly. Hey, Johnny, I would suggest leaving. I'm going to pull you off and then maybe come back in. Might be working, and we'll get started. All right, we'll take Johnny out, and then Johnny will be back in a moment. All right, this is Free Thinker Radio. Me and Micah are here. Johnny will be back.
KPFT. Hey, Derrick, one aspect of the officer firing I thought was interesting is the response by the union and how diametrically opposed it seemed to be to what Acevedo and the boss of HPD's Acevedo and the 5G champion Sylvester were saying. And I wondered if some of it's that their base, right? Obviously, the head of the union has to be responsible to the responsive police officers or whatever. And the mayor, and as we've been talking about, Art Acevedo, are more like politicians, and they want to appease the masses so much. So I don't know. I thought it was interesting to at least note that was their stance. And of course, their stance during the Tuttle thing was, don't speak about this.
Yeah, for sure. It was silence. All right, Johnny, you there with us?
He's here. He has to use sign language.
Man, I don't know what's up with his audio. That really sucks. We need to hear Johnny. All right, Micah, well, you want to move? I'll move forward, Johnny. I'm going to steal your story until your sound comes on, because I know this is an important one that people in Houston need to hear as we're doing this show, broadcasting on 90.1 KPFT FM radio in Houston. A lot of people who watch on TV, watch on the internet, don't know that we're live as well on FM radio in Houston. That gives us an opportunity to meet and reach all kinds of people that we don't normally come across on the internet. Because the one thing about the internet and the social medias is their algorithm brings like minds together. So it's harder and harder to get outside of that bubble. But with KPFTs, people can be driving through Houston and all of a sudden they randomly choose to go to 90.1, or they scroll across it and they hear stories like this. Houston's daily COVID-19 tally inflated by months-old cases. And Johnny brought this one to our attention. Local health officials point to messy backlog of testing data. And they talked about this when I met with them last week. They said, there's problems with this backlog. And as we're going to talk about just a moment briefly, it's bigger than just a backlog. Houston health area authorities are overstating the number of new COVID-19 cases as their teams struggle to work through a backlog of old test results in the third largest U.S. county. And it says on an almost daily basis, Harris County Public Health releases a tally of what it calls new cases. And a Bloomberg analysis found that these cases include hundreds of diagnoses that are weeks or months old. On Wednesday, for example, more than 82% of the cases disclosed were actually detected before this month and some back as far as May. The confusion means that authorities may be exaggerating the current severity of the outbreak, and they claim we're unknowingly understating how bad it was back in June and July. So what this is saying is that it was actually much worse over the summer. And, I think that's probably debatable as well, based on other things we've seen and my own work in Houston here. But that's what they're claiming, that it was understated in the past, and now we're just catching up. And because of that, numbers are higher than they really are, which is making them exaggerate the severity of the current situation in Houston. So the situation also highlights the dilemma facing political leaders imposing mask mandates and other restrictions based on what they presume is accurate, timely data. And that's where I think it's important just to kind of pause for a moment, because as I mentioned, and those of you who watched and listened last week, we played the interview that I did with Dr. Pearce, the Houston Health Authority, where he specifically mentions that, this is a problem. And I also asked him about the PCR test, and we don't have time to get into that fully, but we will put these links in the show description. But I asked him about the PCR test because it was a test that was created by a guy named Kerry Mullis, who was a Nobel Prize winner for his discovery, his invention. But he also, towards the end of his life, believed that it was ineffective to detect viruses and that it could cause all kinds of problems. And unfortunately, he died in late 2019 before COVID started. Otherwise, he probably might have a lot to say about what's going on right now. And I asked Dr. Pearce and Houston Health Authority about the PCR test picking up past infections, because what I've learned, or other researchers have learned, is if you've ever had a coronavirus, which is actually quite common, then these tests could be picking up previous infections, as well as there are problems with thresholds. And we don't have time to get into all this, but I am just going to throw a few links for everybody who wants to get deeper. What we're showing right now, what we're looking at, is an article from just a week ago. BBC coronavirus tests could be picking up dead virus. And this goes into this discussion. And it's from Professor Carl Hennigan, who is one of the leading authors of a new study that says that this could lead to an overestimate of the current scale of the pandemic. And he says, some experts say it is uncertain how a reliable test can be produced that doesn't risk missing cases. So they're missing cases. So they're saying like it's unreliable, but it's the best we can do, basically. And the lead author of this new study says that he believes the detection of old viruses could partly explain why the number of cases is rising while hospital admissions remain stable. And I'm just going to show on screen, I did find this study. It's called Viral Cultures for COVID-19 Infectivity Assessment. I found another one. Apparently, after this announcement was made, the UK government actually put out this report on September 9th, just a couple of days ago, about the PCR test, where they specifically mentioned threshold, which is what I was told last week in Houston. It says all laboratories should determine the threshold for a positive result at the limit of detection. And so they're admitting that there are problems and that there's a threshold. Like the doctor told me for Houston, maybe the threshold is if you have 30, whatever the measurement is, you have 30. If you have more than that, then you're considered positive. But if you have just under that, you're considered negative. Like he's just basically saying it shouldn't be a binary thing. And there's just a number of problems with this PCR test that is become so much the focus. I found another study that is in preprint right now and should be coming out later this year. SARS-CoV-2 testing, the limit of detection matters. My point with all that, I know that was a lot of information, is just that as we're finding out here in Houston, and now people are finding out in the UK, and now we're seeing other more credentialed people than any of us here are saying that, there's so much that we're not being told about this situation. And it's really just being blown out of proportion. I feel pretty confident saying that now. That some people might not like that, but it seems quite clear that there's such a number of problems with these tests and with everything we got going on. Micah, what do you think about all that? I know that was a lot of stuff there, but just the PCR test, because we were just talking about this last week here in Houston.
I think that, this is one of those things where it's epistemologically verifiable. You could get out there, but who has the time to get all these numbers? So people tend to rely on what they hear. And this is part of what happens is we'll have some misinformation for a while or some diluted information. And later there'll be, an editorial that takes it back. This is a historic thing. Now, I don't know exactly what to think about these PCRs and getting into all of that because it's beyond my, level of expertise. But it does sound like there's a lot of fishy stuff. And it does seem like there's been a lot of things to count, like the number of cases as opposed to, there seems to be a lot of propaganda around it. And so, when you hear that various tests are suspect, if that's something you want to get into and make sure you know more about, then yeah, I would want to know more about these tests. This is the first I really kind of heard so much about the tests being, as you were saying, the PCR tests being defunct or suspect, detecting old viruses, dead viruses. I thought that was kind of interesting. And it's, it gets to a point, like you said, how this is just the novel coronavirus. So if it's detecting anyone who's ever had a virus, that's almost like, I don't know. I think the death rate matters a lot. And I think that's part of what needs to be paid attention to as they rattle up the numbers, because it does seem like there is a drive to emphasize the threat of it. Let's say that. And, I'm not trying to minimize it. But when you see suspect things like this, it makes you question why there's such a drive to, maximize its reach and its effect.
Yeah, I agree. And I just want to add one more thing to that, because we're going to switch gears real quick. Johnny's got a story from California, if his audio's working now, that everything we just talked about. I want to remind you guys that it was here on Freethinker Radio where Johnny first found the studies that now we know are called parasite stress theory that show, and Johnny and Micah did some of the research. I ended up writing some articles about it, showing that when there's a threat of a pathogen, of a virus, whether dangerous or perceived to be dangerous, people become more obedient, they prefer conformity, and they allow authoritarian government policies. So it really is a reflection of what we're seeing in the world right now. You with us, Johnny?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, there he is. All right. Johnny's got this crazy story.
I had a no mic button on my computer I was unaware of, so now I know about that button.
All right, well, let's do it, man.
Sure. So pulling up, and I'm sure a lot of people have heard about this. It's kind of being said in different ways, but we're going to get into the nitty gritty of it. California legislator passes bill reducing penalties for oral anal sex with willing children. And it says California lawmakers have passed a bill on Monday that would reduce the penalties for adults who have oral or anal sex with willing minor child if the offender is within 10 years of the age of the victim. So that's already kind of like crazy standard, if you just think about just the 10-year rule, when obviously 11 to 21 is horrible and all those kinds of things. And without getting too far into this article, I don't know if you just want to jump over. Do you have the actual bill pulled up?
Yep.
Because if you actually look in the bill, so it doesn't necessarily reduce the charges, but what it does is it allows people to skip registering. So it says they don't have to register as a sex offender under the code. So a person convicted of violation of subdivision B, all that legal stuff, shall not be required to register if at the time of offense the person is not more than 10 years older than the minor, as measured from the minor's date of birth to the person's date of birth, and the conviction is the only one requiring the person to register. So it's just they kind of like the headline kind of makes it sound like it's you're not going to get as much jail time. It's about registering, but still, I mean, who wants to go in the direction of lessening charges for anything of that sort, really? So I don't know how that got thrown in there, and it's kind of embarrassing, I think.
Yeah, it's weird to me. It's weird to me because, like, I understand certain attempts to make laws like this, like in the sense of like there's the 17-year-old who had a 19-year-old lover and they get caught and that's like illegal, and then one of them has to register as a sex offender for the rest of life. But 10 years is a pretty wide gap.
I thought that was reasonable in Texas. Like that law was more reasonable within 2 years, because you could have gone to high school together. If you could have gone to high school together and you're still in that age range, it's maybe an argument, but
with this age range,
talking about someone who's in elementary school when you're in.
At this age range, they could be in high school, like that 13-year-old who was molested by the school officer. That guy could have been 23, 24. She was 13. She could have been 13 or 14, and he wouldn't even be registering. Oh, he didn't anyway. But, in this situation, no one would. Not just, you wouldn't have to be a school officer to not register. Just anyone. It's just insane. It's funny.
Yeah.
Micah, I know that.
Global Liberty says that the judge can still require registration, so I may or may not have known that. But either way, I mean, the fact that they're just throwing that in there at the discretion of the judge. So, I mean, what's that, luck of the draw? Like, why have it in there?
Yeah, it seems like an unnecessary, I don't know, just unnecessary step for me. I don't know how many times that situation comes up where the law needs to go in that direction, right? And of course, there is like the extreme, more conservative perspective where people are just going to automatically assume the worst. But I think in this case, it is a little weird. You don't have to be some super square person, some super prude to be like, this is kind of weird. What's the need for that law? Micah, I know we're down to the last couple minutes, so we can wrap this up. But you've got a couple important stories here that I want to make sure we get into. We pull them up for you.
Yeah, for sure. Let's get into this interesting whistleblower one. And I've got a article that I was reading here from the Washington Times that I thought was interesting because I hadn't heard about this. And there's an individual, just to make it quick, because I think Brian Murphy, he used to lead the Office of Intelligence and Analysis and is facing controversy himself, says that former Homeland Security Secretary Kirstjen Nielsen disregarded his research and misled Congress by claiming thousands of potential terrorists have crossed the border in an attempt to justify border wall construction. Mr. Murphy says his research showed at most 3 derivative terrorism suspects had crossed the border. And you can get more into that. But yeah, it's kind of an interesting new revelation that I hadn't heard, that DHS is possibly misleading the people's representatives, saying thousands of people in front of Congress and it only being 3. That's a great story to get deeper into. I know one of the other things that we were going to talk a little bit about, we've been talking about, for some time, the whole time the show's been on, but kind of a little bit more focus, took a turn around last September, was the economy. And one thing I think is interesting is New York City in the light of this, because we see here this article from the Post where I guess you could maybe say the elite, for lack of a better word, where the CEOs of companies and such are getting after the mayor and the governor to crack down on crime. And you've seen stats of people just moving out of New York City and the real estate market there collapsing, like apartment building sales down 53%, office sales down 27%, hotel sales down 70%, commercial condo sales down 68%. And meanwhile, there's numerous articles out there. You've got that one up. There was one a couple of months earlier where from the CNN that says New York City crime stats show spikes in burglaries and murders so far this year. I mean, it's out everywhere. Yahoo picking it up a little bit later and running with it as each month it seems to be getting worse. And now, just recently, there's an article out from, I guess, a local station in New York saying the top uniformed officer once again decried the sharp rise in violence in the city. And this is just this week. As numbers showed, August was a continuation of the increased bloodshed throughout the 5 boroughs that started toward the beginning of summer. There were 242 shootings in August alone, and that's an increase of 166% from the same month a year ago. Tensions are high. People are losing their money, losing a lot of, hope, and pressures are high. So it sounds like, New York City is a place, and maybe more of the cities are places that people are trying to get out of. I think that's been, you've always had a wave of that, but it seems like, combined with the economic difficulties, this is just a result also of the economic difficulties. And what I wonder now is, where's the New York City going to get all its taxes from as people leave there and it turns into, a place people don't want to live. And so anyway, I just thought we'd talk about, economics and its relation to crime and this whole shutdown thing and blah, blah, blah.
I want to ask you, Micah, I know we're starting to wind down. I have one more election one I want to talk about, but what do you think about, because I've seen this in the comments on YouTube and elsewhere, and just, around the internet, that some people say, well, okay, what you just described is happening in New York. New York just recently announced that they were going to take $1 billion from the police department. New York's a democratic city, and there's people who try to say, oh, the crime is on the rise. It's just the democratic cities, which plays right into that Trump sort of rhetoric of like, we need law and order, we need to send the feds into Portland. And then of course, some of these people who support it are starting to support a police state because they're like, you need to shut down the rioters and looters or whatever. But what do you think about that? Like, the reality is, whether it's Democrat or Republican, there are cities that like just mentioned, that people are wanting to leave because of crime on the rise. And I don't think just because you take money away from cops, crime is going to immediately rise. I think that's a BS argument, and
especially when you shut down everyone's business. I mean, people are out there, who are struggling to get by with a job, and some of these people, work in places that are totally closed for months. And you could say, well, everybody could get unemployment. No, not everybody. And I don't know. I think that it's tied to the economic stress and some of the other stresses going on in the city. I'm a little bit concerned when we think about what's the word when they basically take all the services away from the people and bail out the rich. I'm kind of concerned with some of those things because we've seen the state and the governor try to take a stand on this defund the police. I don't know what to say about it. I don't think it's only in Democratic cities. I think people don't want to be in any city when there's not jobs and there's not things to do. It's just, why would you be in the city while that's the case? I mean, you can't do anything and you're not employed and you got to pay super high taxes and super high rent for what? So I think that's part of what's going on in people's minds. You see that more millennials are moved home than ever, so I don't know. I think it's a horribly difficult time economically for a lot of people.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Level jobs are shut down.
And we're also, there's the COVID, like you said, COVID lockdown, in addition to an economy that was already suffering because of, hyperinflation coming sooner and sooner because of all the things that we've talked about, the Fed and with central banking, and then shutting people's businesses down. And then at the same time, all of that sort of stoking division that we've seen happening in the last months. And then to me, that leads me to this next story here, because I think that as we've talked about in recent weeks and really over the last almost 10 years now, that every time there's an election, it's a great time to divide the people. It's a great time to just keep people fighting over, this time it's Biden and Trump, and they're tweeting this at each other and they're saying it's so much garbage. And with all that in the background, we've got talk of a second wave coming, potentially a second wave of coronavirus that, as we said earlier, is questionable. We've got talk of multiple mentions of this phrase, dark winter. And as we've said on this show, dark winter was a military exercise happened in the past having to do with anthrax, and just that terminology is being thrown around. And then at the same time, I just caught this one in the last week. The Department of Homeland Security puts out a report saying that there is a potential for an electromagnetic pulse, EMP attack as the election nears. And as this is coming from Activist Post, and just as I said a moment ago, Activist Post editors, they wrote, a recent interview with Whitney Webb and Ryan of The Last American Vagabond. I think that's an important one. We'll link to that because it talks about this concept of dark winter and the fact that, as we said on this show, Cyber Reason, an Israeli intelligence firm, did simulations where they said that the elections are going to get canceled and all kinds of crazy things. And I just want everybody hearing this on KPFT and on the internet, all the places we're live right now, to really think about the potential for what's coming, knowing that we know things like Event 201 and all this sort of stuff. When you're looking back and you're like, oh, if only we'd known that they were simulating this beforehand, maybe I would have done something differently. I don't know. But the U.S. Department of Homeland Security just recently released a new report warning about the potential for an EMP attack on the U.S. This was released on Thursday, September 3rd, about 60 days until the presidential election on November 3rd. And says that there are, quote, evolving threats against the American homeland, most recently highlighting efforts to combat an EMP attack, which could disrupt the electrical grid and potentially damage electronics. The department released an EMP status report via the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency that says that, quote, key actions to address be seen if this is a damage to the nation's electrical grid. A senior official performing the duties of deputy secretary said EMP attacks are part of the emerging threats against our nation and demand a response. This is why DHS is taking these contingencies very seriously, working diligently to mitigate our risks and equipping our state and local partners with the resources they need to do the same. And so to combat these emerging threats, last year, March 2019, Trump signed an executive order delegating the power to the White House for EMP preparedness. So this, they're talking about there could be a cyber Pearl Harbor if the United States or if China tried to attack the United States' electric grid. So that's sort of one recent thing. And then this other one I'll just add here, and then I'm done for tonight. but I think this is equally important. Mark Zuckerberg, of course, the CEO of Facebook, one of the platforms we're live on right now, recently gave an interview on Axios, which is on HBO, saying that the election could take up to weeks afterwards to determine who actually wins and that this could cause civil unrest, but that the people need to get used to this. This was on a recent appearance again on Axios on HBO. Facebook founder Mark Zuckerberg says that his company and other media should work to convince.
Get used to civil unrest.
Yeah, get used to civil unrest, and that basically, I mean, they're essentially saying that they have to convince the public. I'm just going to read his quote so people know we're not taking anything out of context. This is exactly what Zuckerberg said. One of the things that I think we and other media need to start doing is preparing the American people. And he says that there's nothing illegitimate about this election taking additional days or even weeks to make sure that all the votes are counted in. That may be important to be sure that it is a legitimate and fair election. And he said that they will, quote, use a bunch of different messaging around that just so people know that that's normal. And they also explained, this was kind of a new announcement about Facebook's policies related to the election, that, quote, if one of the candidates in any of the races claims victory before there's a consensus result, then we're going to add some informational context to the post directly saying that there's no consensus result yet. So like if Trump or whoever declares like they're going to have a victory and, you know, the media and Facebook have decided that that's not the truth yet, then they're going to add, you know, some little disclaimer or something on,
What a strange bunch of predictions.
yeah, and then listen to this. He goes, I think that this is important because there's unfortunately, I think, a heightened risk of civil unrest in the period between voting and a result being called or after that. I just think that we need to be doing everything we can to reduce the chances of violence or civil unrest in the wake of this election. And the reason I bring that up, in addition to the DHS warning, but I want to remind you guys that in addition, there's just so many like war game simulations happening right now. We got the DHS warning about EMP attack. We got the Cyber Reason Israeli intelligence company saying that smart cars were going to be used to crash into voters and cancel the elections. Now, this is a totally different war game where John Podesta, who many of you will know was Hillary Clinton's chairperson of her campaign, top Democrat, he was a part of this simulation. And in the simulation, he played Joe Biden. And as him playing Joe Biden, he basically said that they were going to contest the election results and that they were planning a second inauguration in California. And this ultimately almost led the country to the brink of civil war until the military had to get involved and take sides. And this became such a big deal that in the last couple of days, one of the top generals in the military, his name is Milley, I can't find his first name, basically put out a statement saying that he believes, he's one of the top commanders, saying that in the event of a dispute over some aspect of the elections, by law, U.S. courts and U.S. Congress are required to resolve the disputes, not the U.S. military. So I don't know what the heck's coming up, guys, but I'm just putting this out there because this is just so much coming out around election night and around where it's going, and civil unrest and potential attacks on the grid. And I mean, I don't know. And then you got all these characters involved, you know. It doesn't sit right with me.
No, it's quiet. It's too quiet.
You gotta remember, you just
Like,
these threats from the DHS with the EMP, but it was the DHS that said thousands of people were streaming across the border. So like you don't know which sources to trust, which sources not to trust, and you basically just gotta trust in something you believe and work on things. You know, I don't doubt that it's a crazy, scary world, but. Whoo. And I will say this though about the elections, you know, they're taking weeks to figure out is, you know, Congress, you got like two houses and one can pick, one will go one way and one will go the other. And it'll be like, oh, Congress, the House backs Biden, but the Senate backs Trump. And it'll be, you see what I'm saying? If there's a really split, it'll go like think that far. And that'll help, you know, galvanize even more.
Yeah, I think it's ultimately about just dividing people. And we've been saying this, man. Like, I just don't see either side just sort of walking away peacefully. Okay, well, Biden lost. We'll just deal with Trump for 4 more years. Or the other side, okay, well, Biden, you know, won. We'll just accept that.
I mean,
what about the other side of those two? Like, where the coin even has 3 sides. Like, come on. There's more than just Biden and Trump, y'all. I hope that y'all recognize that. Not just your lives, but even more on the ballot. Mickey Mouse, you could write Mickey Mouse, and that's more than Biden and Trump. I'm just saying.
I mean, they've also connected coronavirus issues to this divide, you know. So it could all just kind of like blend in with the no masks, and all that stuff. I don't know.
It really does feel like a perfect storm of
Getting
things colliding.
an excuse to hit somebody, you know, and there's been people shot, and now is just the time to see through the right and left paradigm more than ever. Now's the time to, you know, take care of yourself and your family. And if they're saying EMP, then I mean, shit, maybe buy some batteries. Like, I don't know, you know, try to figure out some solutions and take their threats halfway serious, because they could pick one. I don't know.
I think you hit on to something that they kind of tried to ridicule for a few times, and that's just being prepared. You know, it's ridiculous not to be prepared. That's why nobody has any money saved, and they all living on credit and stuff. So I think that's the best thing we can do now in these uncertain times, is think about what really matters, you know, food and shelter and loved ones and such, and security, right? So I think that we can turn things around by, you know, starting to manage that a little bit.
And I was also trying to remember when I was talking to my parents the other day that, like, a lot of these people are a vocal minority, and they're pandering to this extremism, and the news likes to make people seem like there's more participants in this army of left and army of right, when a lot of us really are in the center, and a lot of us don't want war. And, you know, it's going to be more rational minds just trying not to get torn in half one way or another.
Yeah, I like one of the comments said that they're trying to start a war between us or something along those lines, and I think that's really true of what's going on, you know. And like you said, Micah, it doesn't have to be a bad thing to be somebody who's prepared. You know, that became, now you're a doomsday prepper, you're this or that, but the point is trying to think ahead, and really at this point, knowing everything we know that has happened, the amount of events that have happened that then after the fact we look back and see, like, oh, look at these weird coincidences of people, you know, taking stocks out or buying certain stocks, or, you know, people moving money around, or simulations and exercises that happened. You know, it's just, I think it's a good idea to be prudent. That's the only reason I bring up these stories, is not to say, like, freak out, you know, there's going to be a false flag, because at the end of the day, none of us sitting here know for certain. But I do know there's a lot of weird predictions about what's going to happen in the election. There's a lot of amping up of it's the end of democracy, and what's going to happen if Trump doesn't, you know, leave office, and things of that sort. You know, it's just a good idea to be thinking solutions and how you can survive without being dependent on these various systems.
For sure.
All right, guys. Anything else y'all want to get into?
That's it, man. Just stay safe out there. I love everyone.
Yeah, we'll be back next week. I want to remind you guys that you can find Freethinker Radio. We have this page. If you're looking at it, it's a website called Pinecast. It's our podcasting page. And also you can find Freethinker Radio on Spotify. If you have that app and listen on there, you can find our
NSA admits that they were spying on you the whole time, and they determined it was illegal and probably unconstitutional. That finally came out after 7 years. Snowden, all kinds of stuff. Keep researching.
Yeah, they were like, "Oh yeah, Snowden was right. That was illegal." We're like, we said that like 8 years ago.
He tried to protect y'all.
What was it? 6 years ago now? 4, 5?
Yeah, 7 years ago.
2013 or something like that.
Yeah. Oh man! And
thanks everybody for all the comments, shares, love. It helps get us through after a decade of Freethinker Radio. We love you more and more.
Yeah, we'll be back next week for a full episode, an hour to hour and a half or so. We're just getting settled in as I'm in Mexico again. The guys are in Houston, but we appreciate everybody who's been watching and listening.
I'm not in Houston.
And Micah is in a hidden bunker somewhere with fish behind him. I can hear the fish. He didn't unplug the fish tank.
Fish tank.
All right, guys. Hey, I'm going to go ahead and since we're going to wrap up this way, and I'll have to edit this anyways, I'm going to throw in some Fusca, and you guys who are watching can jam out to some Houston ska punk about fuck the police, you know.
Fucking Joe. Right. Yeah, this one's for you.
This is in honor of the police being fired for killing somebody, you know.
This is a good song.
They actually got fired for killing somebody. So thank you guys for listening. Until next time, Freethinker Radio. Peace.
Ones that are out there spreading the rhetoric that police officers are the enemy. Well, just know we've all got your number now. We're going to be keeping track of all of y'all, and we're going to make sure that we hold you accountable every time you stir the pot on our police officers.
light of day.
Charlie 412 RV.
If they're set free, they can massacre someone else.
Here's the dollar so right now.
The pigs are patrolling the streets.
I need the
Black and brown people are a dying breed.
I need the 2 natives identified.
But without the badge, what can they achieve?